My name is Eleanor, and I'm 61 years old. I'll never forget the day my son-in-law burst out laughing the moment he saw me in my old brown suit. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, and I had dressed carefully for my daughter Clara's anniversary dinner. The suit was simple wool, neatly pressed, something I'd owned for decades. I knew it wasn't fashionable, but it was mine. Steady, comfortable, and familiar. When I arrived at their house, Clara opened the door with her usual warmth. Darren followed behind her, his eyes scanning me from head to toe. He was wearing a sleek designer jacket, his wrist flashing with a silver watch that probably cost more than my monthly pension. He looked at my suit, raised his eyebrows and smirked. "Nice museum piece," he said, laughing under his breath. Clara's face immediately tensed. "Darren, stop it," she whispered, trying to brush it off. But he didn't stop. He circled around me, chuckling, as if my outfit were the evening's entertainment. I smiled politely, pretending his words didn't sting. I had dealt with prideful people before, but something about Darren's laughter cut deeper than I expected. Maybe it was because I had always tried to respect him for Clara's sake. Or maybe it was because I saw the same look in his eyes that so many others had given me when I was younger, pity mixed with judgment. We sat down for dinner, and I could feel his amusement linger across the table. Every time I lifted my glass, I saw that smirk. He didn't need to say more. The message was clear. I didn't belong in his polished, wealthy world. He and Clara had met at a business seminar years ago. Darren was ambitious, confident, always networking. Clara admired that about him. I did too, at first. But once the wedding came and the expensive house followed, I noticed how quickly he measured people by their possessions. The car they drove, the brand of their clothes, even the kind of wine they ordered. And I, an old widow living in a modest neighborhood, fit nowhere into his world of image and status. As we ate, he kept making small jokes about vintage charm. He asked if I'd ever thought of upgrading my wardrobe, saying it with that same teasing smile. Clara kicked him under the table, but he laughed it off. I tried to change the topic, asking about their work, their plans, their new renovations. But no matter what I said, I could feel his condescension sitting there between us like a stain. I looked down at the brown wool and brushed an invisible crumb from the sleeve. The fabric was slightly faded now, the seams softened by time. Still, it held its shape perfectly. I had taken care of it all these years, hand-washing, pressing, keeping it safe from moths and dust. It was more than just a piece of clothing. It carried memories, resilience, and history. Darren wouldn't have understood that. To him, clothes were about status. But to me, this suit meant survival. I'd bought the fabric during one of the hardest times of my life. Every stitch had a story. Every crease was earned. It wasn't made by a brand or a factory, it was made by someone whose hands had given me more than fabric and thread. I looked up from my plate, meeting Darren's smug grin. For a brief second, I almost told him that this old museum piece was handcrafted by a man whose name he would one day beg to know. But I stayed silent. Instead, I smiled gently and said, "Some things never go out of style." He laughed again, thinking I was joking. But inside, I felt something shift quietly, calmly. I wasn't angry. I was patient. The kind of patience that comes from knowing life has a way of humbling people without you needing to lift a finger. That night, after dinner, I went home and hung the suit carefully back in its place. I ran my hand over the smooth shoulder seam and smiled. Darren saw only an old suit, but what he didn't know was who had tailored it or how deeply that man's work had changed my life. If only he knew, I thought. If only he understood who had stitched this fabric together with such care, he'd swallow every word he said. That brown wool suit wasn't just clothing, it was a piece of my past stitched with love, pain, and gratitude. Every time I looked at it, I saw the years that shaped me, the struggles I endured, and the kindness that kept me going when the world was cruel. More than 30 years ago, I was a young widow with nothing but a small child and a stack of unpaid bills. My husband, Henry, had been killed in a construction accident when I was 28. One minute, he kissed me goodbye before work. The next, 2 officers were standing at my door with their hats in their hands. His death left me broken, not just emotionally, but financially. Clara was only 6 then. I remember her sitting at the kitchen table, coloring with dull crayons while I tried to figure out how to keep the lights on. The landlord was kind for a while, but kindness doesn't pay rent. I needed a job, any job, but I had nothing suitable to wear to an interview. I walked into town one morning, looking for secondhand stores or anywhere that might sell used office clothes. That's when I passed a small tailor shop tucked between a bakery and a florist. The sign above the door read Langley's Fine Tailoring. I hesitated outside, knowing I couldn't afford anything from a place that looked that respectable. But something made me go in anyway. The bell over the door jingled softly. Inside, the air smelled like cedar and starch. Rows of fabrics lined the walls, and behind a wooden counter stood a man in his late 50s with silver hair and kind eyes. He looked up from his sewing machine and smiled. "Good morning," he said. "How can I help you?" I explained that I was looking for something modest, maybe a skirt or jacket, just enough to look presentable for an interview. My voice cracked when I admitted I couldn't pay much. He didn't flinch or frown. Instead, he came around the counter and said, "Sit down, dear. Let's see what we can do." His name was Victor Langley. He asked what kind of work I was applying for, and I told him about the secretary position at a local insurance office. He nodded thoughtfully and then pulled a bolt of brown wool from a shelf. "This one," he said, running his fingers along the fabric. "It's durable, classic, and quiet. You'll look confident without trying to." I told him I couldn't afford custom tailoring. He waved his hand like the thought offended him. "Pay me when you can," he said. "Or better yet, bake me a pie sometime. I prefer apple." I laughed, but tears welled in my eyes. No one had been that kind to me in a long time. He measured me carefully, humming softly as he worked. He moved slowly and precisely, like every inch of fabric deserved his full respect. When I returned a week later, the suit was waiting for me. It was perfect. The fit, the feel, the way it made me stand a little taller, it was everything I needed. I paid him what little I had, but he refused to take all of it. "Save the rest for your daughter," he said. I wore that suit to the interview, and I got the job. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and it changed everything for Clara and me. That one act of kindness helped me rebuild my life. Over the years, Victor became more than a tailor. He became a friend. He'd fix the seams for free whenever I needed it and would always ask about Clara. He told me stories about the people he'd dressed, about craftsmanship, and about pride in one's work. I didn't see him as often after I moved to a different neighborhood, but I never forgot him. When Clara went off to college, I wore the suit again for her graduation. The color had softened by then, the texture smoother with age, but it still looked as elegant as the day I bought it. And when I looked in the mirror, that morning, I could still hear Victor's voice. "You'll look confident without trying to." Years passed, and fashions changed, but I never got rid of that suit. It had carried me through job interviews, meetings, and milestones. It reminded me of the strength I'd found when I had nothing else. When Darren mocked it, he didn't just insult a piece of clothing. He insulted the story, the survival, and the generosity woven into every thread. To him, to me, it was the reason I could stand in his dining room at all. If I'd told him the truth that the man who made this old museum piece had become one of the most respected craftsmen in the country, he would have choked on his own laughter. But I didn't. Some stories deserve to be told at the right time, in the right way. As I folded the suit later that night, I thought about Victor and wondered if he was still alive. It had been years since I last heard from him. Maybe he'd retired, maybe he'd moved away, or maybe he'd gone on to greater things. What I didn't know then was that fate would soon bring his name back into my life, and that this same suit, the one my son-in-law mocked, would become the thread that unraveled everything Darren believed about success and worth. Dinner that night was meant to celebrate Clara and Darren's 5th anniversary, but it turned into something else entirely. The restaurant was one of those modern places with low lighting, velvet booths, and waiters who spoke in quiet tones. Darren loved places like that. They made him feel important. I had reserved a small table by the window and brought a wrapped gift for them, a framed photo of their wedding day. It wasn't expensive, but it was sentimental. Clara had always appreciated things that came from the heart. When I arrived, they were already seated. Darren looked sharp, as always, navy blazer, gold cufflinks, everything in place. Clara waved me over with a warm smile. "Mom, you look lovely," she said, though her voice had a nervous edge. Darren leaned back in his chair, his wine glass already half empty. "Well," he said with a grin, "if it isn't our favorite time traveler." I sat down quietly, pretending not to hear. Clara's eyes darted to him in warning, but he ignored it. That suit again, Eleanor? You really do keep the classics alive. The waiter came just in time to distract us. I smiled politely and ordered a small salad. Darren ordered a bottle of wine I couldn't pronounce and 2 of the most expensive entrees on the menu. When the waiter left, Darren leaned forward on his elbows. You know, he said, swirling his glass, it's kind of amazing. Most people your age don't hang on to things that long. That suit has to be 30 years old? I nodded slowly. 31, actually. He laughed, shaking his head. Unbelievable. You could probably sell it to a museum. They love antique things. Clara sighed softly. Darren, please. He shrugged, pretending innocence. What? I'm just saying she should be proud. It's vintage. People pay a lot for old things these days. He smirked as he spoke, and I felt the sting in every word. His tone wasn't admiration, it was mockery dressed up as charm. I kept my composure. Years of hardship had taught me that silence often spoke louder than anger. I took a sip of water, then said evenly, well, it's held up better than most things do over time. Clara reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it lightly. You look beautiful, Mom, she whispered. For a while the conversation shifted to safer topics: her work, their upcoming vacation, a property Darren was buying. He talked about numbers, investments, and names of people I didn't know, all in that confident tone of his. Every word seemed chosen to remind me of how far above me he thought he was. Then the waiter returned to refill our glasses, and I caught something strange. The young man's eyes lingered on my suit, not in judgment but recognition. He glanced at the stitching near the sleeve, then looked at me with a curious smile. It was fleeting, but it unsettled me. How could a stranger recognize a detail like that? Everything all right? Clara asked, noticing my distraction. Yes, dear, I said softly. Just thinking. Darren chuckled. Don't overthink the fashion choices, Eleanor. Some things just can't be saved. That one hurt, but I didn't show it. Instead, I smiled. You're probably right. Some things can't be saved, only remembered. He didn't catch the weight behind my words, but Clara did. She gave me a small, grateful look, the kind daughters give when they want to apologize for someone else's behavior. Dinner went on. Dessert came and went. Darren dominated every topic, interrupting anyone else who tried to speak. I listened, nodded, and kept my dignity. When the check arrived, he made a show of paying it with his platinum card, glancing around to see who was watching. He thrived on attention, and tonight was no different. When we stepped outside, the cool air brushed my face, and I pulled my coat tighter. Darren lit a cigarette and leaned against his car, smoke curling upward. Well, he said, exhaling. You've got to admit, Mom, that suits a survivor. Maybe it'll outlast all of us. I smiled faintly. Maybe it will. He grinned, thinking he'd had the last word. But inside me, something stirred a mix of sadness and quiet satisfaction. He had no idea the story that lived inside these stitches. No idea whose hands had crafted this suit. No idea how close he was to learning just how wrong he was. As we said our goodbyes, Clara hugged me tightly and whispered, Don't mind him, Mom. He doesn't mean it. I kissed her cheek. I know, darling. He's young. Life will teach him. She smiled weakly, and they drove away. I stood on the sidewalk for a while, watching the taillights disappear down the street. The city lights reflected on the restaurant window, and in the glass, I saw myself older, wiser, wrapped in brown wool that had seen more truth than any silk suit Darren would ever wear. That night, as I hung the suit carefully in my closet, I thought about the waiter's look of recognition. He had seen something. Maybe the stitching. Maybe the craftsmanship. It had been so many years since I'd heard from Victor Langley, but suddenly, I found myself wondering if he was still out there somewhere. Darren's words echoed faintly in my head. You could sell it to a museum. Maybe one day I would tell him just how valuable this museum piece really was. Not in money, but in meaning. I turned off the light and smiled to myself. He thought he'd made a joke, but he'd only reminded me of something important, that true worth never fades, no matter how many people laugh at it. And deep down, I knew that life had a strange way of connecting the past and present. What neither of them knew, what even I didn't know yet, was that Victor Langley's name was about to come back into my world in a way that would change everything. It was a quiet Wednesday morning when the past came knocking again. I was in my kitchen, pouring a cup of tea, when my phone rang. The number flashing on the screen belonged to Clara. Her voice sounded tense the moment I picked up. "Mom," she said quickly. "Something's happened with Darren's business." I set my cup down. "What do you mean?" "One of his major investors just pulled out of a deal," she said. "It's bad. They were supposed to fund half of his new property project. Darren's furious. He doesn't understand why they backed out." I could hear the stress in her voice, so I tried to stay calm. "These things happen, darling. Maybe it's just business." "It's not," she said. "The investor was all in last week. Then suddenly this morning he sent an email saying he wasn't interested anymore. No explanation, nothing. The man's name is Mr. Langley. Do you know that name?" The world seemed to still around me. I gripped the edge of the counter. "Langley," I repeated slowly. "Yes," Clara said. "Victor Langley." "Why?" For a moment I couldn't speak. The air in my chest thickened, heavy with disbelief. That name after all these years. Could it be the same man? The tailor who had once stitched hope into a brown wool suit for a young widow? "Mom?" Clara's voice pulled me back. "I'm fine," I said quickly. "Just surprised. I used to know someone named Victor Langley. It's probably just a coincidence." But the name kept echoing in my mind long after the call ended. Victor Langley wasn't exactly common, and something told me this wasn't chance. That evening, I searched online. My hands trembled slightly as I typed his name into the search bar. The results appeared almost instantly. Victor Langley Atelier, bespoke tailoring for the world's elite. Photos filled the screen. Elegant suits, high-profile clients, red carpets. The man in the photos was older now, but those sharp eyes, that gentle smile, it was him. Victor had become one of the most respected designers in the country. Articles spoke about how he started with a single shop in a small town, building his empire with nothing but skill and integrity. I sat there, staring at his picture, my heart swelling with pride. The world had finally recognized what I'd known all along, that his hands created more than clothing. They created confidence. I clicked through his website and found a contact page. For a long time, I just looked at the number, hesitating. Then I picked up the phone and dialed. "Langley Atelier. Good afternoon," a woman answered. Her voice was crisp and professional. "Hello," I said softly. "I was wondering if Mr. Langley might be available. My name is Eleanor Cole. He may not remember me, but I..." Before I could finish, I heard a man's voice in the background. "Eleanor Cole?" It was deep, familiar, and instantly transported me 30 years back to that small shop that smelled of cedar and thread. The woman handed him the phone. "Eleanor," Victor said, his tone warm with surprise. "After all these years, it really is you." I smiled, tears forming at the corners of my eyes. "Victor, I can't believe it's you. I saw your name today in connection with a business deal. I just had to call and hear your voice." He chuckled softly. "I've thought about you many times. You were my first customer who ever brought me payment in the form of gratitude rather than money. I still remember that apple pie you brought me after your first paycheck." I laughed quietly. "You remembered that?" "I remember everything," he said. "And I owe you more than you know. You gave me belief when I needed it most. You saw something in my work before anyone else did." We talked for almost an hour, catching up on decades of life. He told me about how he grew from a small-town tailor into a global name, how he never forgot the people who encouraged him at the beginning. I told him about Clara, about Henry, about the years that had followed. When I mentioned Darren, how he mocked the suit Victor had made, Victor's voice harden just slightly. "People forget that true craftsmanship has a soul," he said. "They measure worth by labels, not by legacy." I sighed. "That's Darren, I'm afraid. He's driven by image." "Then, perhaps," Victor said slowly, "it's time someone showed him the difference." There was a pause. "What do you mean?" I asked. He chuckled softly. "Let's just say I've been given the perfect opportunity. You see, this Mr. Cole, your son-in-law, was in talks with my company. He doesn't know yet that I'm the one behind the brand name he's been trying so hard to impress. If you're open to it, I'd like to handle this matter personally." "Victor," I said, startled. "I don't want to cause trouble." He laughed. "Trouble? No, Eleanor. Just a small lesson in humility. You once taught me that kindness can change a person. Maybe it's time I return the favor." I hesitated, but I knew Victor well enough to understand that when he said something, he meant it. "What are you planning?" "You'll see," he said. But promise me something. Don't say a word to your daughter yet. Sometimes the best truths are revealed when no one expects them. When I hung up, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Darren had spent years dismissing me as an embarrassment, and now fate had twisted the threads of life in the most unexpected way. I walked to my closet and opened the door. The brown wool suit hung neatly, the same as always. I ran my hand down the sleeve, feeling the fabric beneath my fingers. It was as if Victor's spirit had been stitched into every inch. He was alive, successful, and somehow our paths had crossed again, right when the universe decided it was time for someone like Darren to learn the truth about value, respect, and the quiet power of dignity. If Darren wanted to mock old things, I thought as I closed the closet door, then I would show him just how valuable age and integrity could be. When Victor invited me to meet him, I felt a nervous excitement that I hadn't felt in years. He sent a car to pick me up on a sunny afternoon, and as it drove through the city, I realized just how much the world had changed since the last time I saw him. Towering glass buildings replaced the small brick shops of our old town, but I still remembered the warmth of his humble tailor's shop and the way the light once fell through the dusty window onto his sewing machine. The car stopped in front of a tall, modern building with gold letters that spelled Langley Atelier. I stepped out, holding my handbag tightly, and took a deep breath. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar just like before, but everything else was different. The space was bright and elegant, with marble floors, soft lighting, and rows of suits displayed like art. Young designers worked quietly behind glass partitions, and every movement was deliberate, graceful. A young woman approached me with a smile. "Mrs. Cole, Mr. Langley is expecting you. Please, this way." She led me down a long corridor to a private studio. When the door opened, I saw Victor standing by a window, looking out over the city. His hair was silver now, but his posture was straight, his presence commanding. When he turned and saw me, his face lit up with the same warmth I remembered. "Eleanor," he said, opening his arms. "It's really you." I walked toward him and hugged him tightly. "It's been too long," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Far too long," he replied, stepping back to look at me. "You haven't changed a bit." I laughed softly. "You're kind, but the mirror would argue otherwise." He smiled. "Age only polishes the things that matter." We sat by his desk, and for a moment, it felt like no time had passed. We talked about everything, his journey from that small-town shop to this global atelier, the clients who had sought him out, the pressures of fame. He spoke humbly, but I could tell he was proud. He deserved to be. Then he asked about me. I told him about Clara, about her marriage, about Darren's success and arrogance. He listened carefully, his fingers tracing the edge of a fabric swatch on the table. "So," he said finally, "he laughed at my suit, did he?" I sighed. He didn't know, of course. To him, it was just an old thing. Victor's eyes darkened slightly. "People like him think money gives them taste. But taste, Eleanor, true taste comes from respect." I nodded. "That's something he doesn't understand." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Then let's help him understand." I frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" He smiled, a small, knowing smile that reminded me of the way he used to look when he was about to do something clever. "Your son-in-law, Darren Cole, runs a real estate company, correct?" "Yes, he's very proud of it." "Well," Victor said, "I've been approached by a group of investors looking to fund a high-profile development. They've asked me to collaborate on a charity event, a gala, to connect designers and developers. His name has already been mentioned." I blinked, trying to keep up. "You mean Darren might attend?" "He will," Victor said confidently. "And when he does, we'll make sure he learns where true value comes from." I shook my head, half amused, half curious. "Victor, you've always been a step ahead of everyone," he chuckled. "It's not revenge I'm after, Eleanor. It's perspective. Men like Darren think they know everything about class, about refinement. But what they lack is humility. Sometimes, all it takes is the right thread to unravel that illusion." I smiled. "And you think you have that thread?" "I think we both do," he said. He stood and walked to a mannequin dressed in a deep navy suit. "Do you remember how you told me all those years ago that a person should wear something that tells the world who they are, not what they can afford?" "I remember," I said softly. He turned toward me. "That's what we'll show him. We'll make him wear a truth he can't hide from." I didn't understand fully what he meant, but I trusted him. I always had. There was something steady about Victor, something that never changed, no matter how much success he gained. Before I left, he took my hand. "Eleanor, I'm proud of you," he said. "You've faced so much and still carry yourself with grace. That's rare. Life teaches us to stand tall," I said. "Even when it tries to bend us." He smiled, nodding. "Then let's stand tall together one more time." As I left his atelier, I felt lighter somehow, as if the past had returned not to haunt me, but to give me strength. The city glimmered outside, full of people rushing, chasing, pretending. And somewhere among them, my son-in-law was about to learn that not all power came from wealth or reputation. I glanced up at the shining letters above the door Langley Atelier and couldn't help but smile. Darren had no idea that the man he wanted to impress was the same one whose work he'd mocked. As the car drove me home, I looked out the window and whispered to myself, maybe some stories aren't finished after all. What I didn't realize then was that this meeting was only the beginning, that Victor's quiet plan would soon unfold in a way neither Darren nor I could ever have predicted. The next week, Victor called me again. His voice was calm, but I could tell there was something deliberate in his tone. "Eleanor," he said, "I've set things in motion. I hope you don't mind a little theater." I smiled faintly. "You always did have a flair for presentation, Victor. What are you planning?" He laughed softly. "Nothing harmful. Just an opportunity for your son-in-law to meet himself through my work and through yours." I didn't press further. I knew Victor well enough to understand that he liked to let his ideas unfold naturally. He always said that good tailoring, like truth, revealed itself in time. 3 days later, Clara called, her voice filled with excitement. "Mom, you'll never guess. Darren just got an invitation to collaborate with a major luxury brand for a charity gala next month. It's supposed to be a huge deal." I let out a quiet breath. "Really? What kind of collaboration?" "They want him to be part of a new sponsorship program. Something about merging real estate with high-end design. He's over the moon. The company is called Langley Atelier. Do you know it?" My heart skipped. "I've heard the name," I said carefully. "It sounds familiar." Clara laughed. "It's apparently a big name. Darren says it could take his firm to the next level." I smiled to myself. Victor had wasted no time. That evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees, thinking about the way life threads its stories together. Darren, so proud of his status, was walking right into a quiet lesson stitched by fate and by Victor's steady hand. A week later, Clara told me that Darren had received a personal message from Victor's assistant, inviting him to the atelier for a consultation. He thought it was a preliminary business meeting. "They said it's a private session with Victor himself," Clara said, practically glowing with pride. "Can you believe that? Darren's meeting the Victor Langley." I nodded, hiding my amusement. "That's quite an honor." Darren didn't waste a second preparing. He bought new shoes, polished his watch, and spent an hour choosing a tie. "Presentation is everything," he said to Clara as I sat quietly at their kitchen table. "Men like Langley respect confidence." Clara smiled at him, but I could see in her eyes that she was still tired of his constant need to prove himself. I stayed quiet, letting him talk. Sometimes words only serve to expose a person's insecurity. When the day of his meeting came, Darren was electric with anticipation. Clara texted me later, saying, "He's there now. I hope this goes well for him." I replied simply, "It will. One way or another." That evening, Victor called again. "He came," he said, his voice low with satisfaction. "And he didn't recognize me." I smiled. "You're sure?" "Oh, yes," he said, chuckling. "He came in bragging about his business, about his connections, about how refined his tastes were." I listened politely. "Of course." Then I told him we'd be creating a custom piece for him, something truly special. "What did you have in mind?" I asked. "The same pattern," Victor said softly. "The very one I used for your suit." I froze, then laughed quietly. "You're serious?" "As serious as the thread that holds it together. I'll make it in fine wool, tailored perfectly. He'll think it's his moment of triumph. But when the truth comes out, he'll understand." The next few weeks went by quickly. Darren was insufferably proud of his collaboration with Victor Langley. He told everyone he met, clients, colleagues, even the mailman. "It's a modern partnership between elegance and enterprise," he'd say, repeating Victor's words as if they were his own. Clara was happy for him, though she confessed she was relieved to see him focused on something productive. I just smiled and listened. Victor sent me occasional updates. He described how Darren marveled at the fabrics, how he talked endlessly about himself, and how he didn't once ask about the meaning behind the designs. "He's all surface," Victor said. "No depth, but that's all right. We'll give him something deeper to wear." The gala drew closer. Invitations went out to investors, designers, journalists, and high society names. Clara told me that Darren had already picked out his speech. "He says this is his moment to show he belongs in their world," she said. Their world. I thought about those words long after she hung up. What Darren didn't understand was that Victor's world wasn't built on wealth, it was built on work, on honesty, on resilience. Things that couldn't be bought or faked. The day before the event, Victor called once more. "Everything is ready," he said. "I've made sure the suit fits him perfectly. And there's one more detail, a signature lining, stitched with initials. You'll appreciate it when you see it." "What did you stitch?" I asked quietly. He paused. "E.L., he said. "For you." My throat tightened. "Victor, you didn't have to." "I did," he interrupted gently. "Because he needs to wear the truth literally. It's poetic justice." That night, I could hardly sleep. I kept picturing Darren, standing proud in a suit born from the same pattern as mine, carrying my initials over his heart. It wasn't revenge that made me smile, it was the symmetry of it all. Life had folded neatly on itself, the past meeting the present, thread by thread. The next morning, Clara called, cheerful as ever. "Mom, are you sure you're coming to the gala tomorrow?" "Of course," I said. I wouldn't miss it for the world. When I hung up, I went to my closet and took out the brown suit. I pressed it carefully, smoothing every line, every memory. Darren had mocked this suit once, but now, unknowingly, he'd become part of its legacy. And as I hung it on the door, I whispered to the quiet room, "Let's see if you can still laugh when the stitches tell their story." When Clara told me Darren's meeting with Victor had gone well, I could hear the pride bubbling in her voice. "Mom, you should have seen him afterward," she said. He was glowing. "He says Mr. Langley was impressed by his business sense and personal style. He can't stop talking about it." I smiled faintly. "I'm sure he made quite an impression." "Oh, he did," she said, laughing. "He even said, Mr. Langley told him he had great presence. He's been walking around the house like a peacock ever since." I didn't say what I was thinking, that Victor had likely chosen those words carefully. He was always strategic with compliments, using them to set the stage for something deeper. That week, Darren became obsessed with his upcoming suit. Every evening, he stood in front of the mirror, imagining what it would look like. He practiced his speech for the gala, pacing around the living room while Clara listened patiently. "It's not just a partnership," he said grandly. "It's a fusion of design and development. Langley and Cole, it even sounds expensive." Clara smiled, but I could tell she was amused more than impressed. "You sound like a commercial," she teased. Darren shrugged. "That's how the world works, Clara. People need to see polish. Style is everything." I stayed quiet. He didn't know that the style he was bragging about came from the same design he'd once ridiculed over dinner. A few days later, Victor's assistant called to schedule Darren's first fitting. Clara insisted I come along for support. "You'll love seeing the atelier, Mom," she said. "It's breathtaking, and Darren will feel proud having you there." I hesitated at first, but curiosity won. When we arrived, Darren's excitement was barely contained. He adjusted his cufflinks as we stepped through the glass doors. The receptionist greeted him by name. "Mr. Cole, welcome back. Mr. Langley is expecting you." Victor appeared moments later, his expression polite and professional. He shook Darren's hand firmly, his face giving nothing away. Then he turned to me, and for a brief moment, his eyes softened with quiet recognition. "Mrs. Cole," he said smoothly. "A pleasure to have you here." Darren puffed his chest. "My mother-in-law has excellent taste. I thought she might appreciate a behind-the-scenes look at true craftsmanship." Victor smiled faintly. "Indeed, craftsmanship is best appreciated by those who understand where it comes from." Darren nodded, oblivious to the layered meaning. Victor led us into the fitting room, spacious, lined with mirrors and warm light. The new suit hung on a mannequin in the center, deep charcoal in color, cut to perfection. Darren's eyes lit up. "That's it, isn't it? That's mine?" "Yes," Victor said. "Shall we see how it fits?" Darren, changed behind a screen, and when he stepped out, even I had to admit he looked extraordinary. The suit framed his shoulders perfectly, the fabric smooth and commanding. He turned in front of the mirror, grinning. "Now this," he said, admiring himself, "is what success looks like." Victor nodded slowly. "It suits you." Darren laughed at the pun, clearly pleased with himself. "This is easily the finest piece I've ever worn." "You truly are an artist, Mr. Langley." Victor inclined his head. "I'm glad you think so. The inspiration for this cut came from one of my earliest designs, something very dear to me." Darren raised an eyebrow. "Really? From one of your early days?" "Yes," Victor said calmly. "A pattern I created more than 30 years ago for someone who believed in my work before anyone else did." "That's impressive," Darren said, turning back to the mirror. "Seems your older work still holds up." I caught Victor's gaze in the reflection. His eyes glinted with quiet amusement. He stepped closer to Darren, adjusting the lapel slightly. "This pattern represents endurance," he said softly. "The kind of strength that doesn't fade, no matter how much time passes." Darren smiled absently, clearly not listening. "I'll be the envy of everyone at that gala." "Perhaps," Victor said. "But remember, envy fades faster than respect." Clara, who had been quietly observing, smiled at that. "That's a lovely saying, Mr. Langley." Victor nodded. "It's one of my favorites." When the fitting ended, Darren shook Victor's hand again. "You've outdone yourself. I'll make sure everyone knows Langley Atelier is behind this masterpiece." Victor smiled faintly. "I'm sure they'll notice without you saying a word." As we left, Darren couldn't stop talking about how he'd impressed one of the world's top designers. "He clearly sees potential in me," he said, opening the car door. "For Clara. I can tell." He even mentioned a future partnership. Clara looked at me over the roof of the car, half smiling, half exasperated. "He's impossible when he's excited," she whispered. I laughed quietly. Let him enjoy it. But as the car pulled away, I glanced back at the atelier's golden letters glinting in the sunlight. Victor stood at the window above, watching us leave, his expression unreadable. Later that night, I received a short text from him. "The first stitch is in place." I smiled, slipping my phone onto the table. Darren thought he was the one making moves, climbing higher in his glittering world of prestige and ego. But he was only following a thread one carefully spun years before, by a man who never forgot where true worth was woven. And soon that thread would lead him straight into the heart of a truth he couldn't laugh at. The weeks leading up to the gala passed quickly. Clara was busy helping with arrangements, and Darren was more insufferable than ever. He couldn't stop talking about Victor Langley, how he was basically a business partner now, and how their creative collaboration was going to make headlines. Every dinner conversation revolved around him, what he would wear, who he would meet, what deals he would close that night. I stayed quiet through most of it, offering polite smiles and short replies. It wasn't worth arguing with his ego, but every time he mentioned Victor's name, I felt a quiet satisfaction settle in my chest. If only he knew who that man really was to me and what that suit he was so proud of truly represented. A few days before the gala, Victor called me again. His tone carried a calm, deliberate pleasure, the kind that only comes from a plan unfolding perfectly. "It's ready," he said simply. "The suit?" "Yes," he replied. "Every stitch exactly as it was meant to be. I used the same pattern from yours, Eleanor, the same measurements, adjusted for him, of course. The design, the shape, even the interior seams. It's a mirror of the suit you wore that night so many years ago when your life began again." I sat quietly, picturing it. "That pattern changed my life," I said softly. "And now it's going to change someone else's, just not in the same way." Victor's voice was warm. "It will humble him, but it will also teach him. Sometimes people must wear the truth to recognize it." When I arrived for the final fitting, Victor greeted me privately before Darren and Clara came in. The atelier was silent, sunlight streaming through tall windows. The air smelled faintly of wool and cedar. On a mannequin in the center of the room hung Darren's finished suit, charcoal gray, sleek, elegant. It was beautiful, even I had to admit that. Victor stood beside it, admiring his work. "It's my best piece in years," he said. "Not because of the craftsmanship, but because of what it represents." He brushed his hand over the sleeve and looked at me. "Do you see it?" The design was unmistakable, the same cut as my old brown suit, but sharper, modernized. It carried the same dignity, the same quiet strength, yet dressed now in confidence and wealth. A reflection of both who I was and who I had become. It's perfect, I whispered. Victor smiled. And inside the lining, I've added something special. He turned the jacket open, revealing golden embroidery hidden near the inner pocket, the initials EL, stitched carefully in cursive thread. I froze. Victor. He shook his head gently. Don't worry, he'll never notice, at least not right away. But when he does, it will matter. Before I could respond, the door opened. Clara and Darren entered, hand in hand. Clara looked radiant, excited. Darren looked like a man about to receive a crown. Victor turned toward them with practiced grace. Mr. Cole, welcome back. Your suit awaits. Darren grinned. I've been counting the days. Let's see this masterpiece. He walked over to the mannequin, examining it as if it were a trophy. Incredible, he said. You can see the quality from a mile away. That's real craftsmanship. Victor nodded modestly. Every thread has a purpose. Darren ran a hand down the sleeve, smiling in satisfaction. I can tell. This will turn heads at the gala. Clara smiled at him, genuinely proud. You're going to look amazing. Victor gestured to the fitting area. Please, try it on. Darren disappeared behind the curtain and re-emerged a few minutes later. When he stepped out, even I couldn't help gasping softly. The suit fit him perfectly, precise at the shoulders, clean at the waist, the kind of tailoring that moved like it was part of the person wearing it. He looked at himself in the mirror, his eyes shining. This is art, he said. Mr. Langley, I've never worn anything like it. Victor smiled. I'm glad it makes you feel confident. But remember, true confidence doesn't come from fabric. Darren chuckled, adjusting his tie. Maybe not, but it doesn't hurt. Victor stepped closer, straightening the lapel with quiet precision. This design, he said softly, is very special to me. It was born from a time when craftsmanship still meant integrity, when people valued quality for what it represented, not what it cost. Darren nodded absently, still admiring himself in the mirror. Well, it certainly represents success to me. I caught Victor's glance in the reflection, a faint flicker of a smile that told me everything I needed to know. The first layer of Darren's illusion had already been sewn in place. When the fitting ended, Darren turned to Victor. I want to thank you personally. You've outdone yourself. I can't wait for everyone to see this. Victor shook his hand firmly. They will, Mr. Cole. And I hope they'll see more than you expect. Darren laughed. Oh, they will. Trust me. As we walked out of the atelier, Clara held my arm. Isn't it amazing, Mom? I've never seen Darren so proud of something. I smiled softly. Yes, dear. It's quite something. On the ride home, Darren couldn't stop talking. This gala is my moment, he said. Once people see me in Langley's suit, they'll know I'm part of that circle, the upper tier. Langley himself said he saw potential in me. I looked out the window, watching the city roll by. I'm sure he did, I said. He laughed, misreading my calm. You'll see, Eleanor. This partnership will make history. I smiled faintly, more to myself than to him. Oh, I don't doubt that at all. When we reached home, I went straight to my room, closed the door, and leaned against it, letting the quiet settle around me. I pictured Darren standing proudly in front of that mirror, wrapped in the very legacy he'd once ridiculed. He saw a luxury suit. What he didn't see, not yet, was the story sewn into its seams. The one that began with kindness, carried through hardship, and was now circling back to humility. Victor had called it poetic justice. I called it symmetry. The suit was finished, the stage was set, and soon, the truth would reveal itself one thread at a time. The night of the gala glittered with money, perfume, and pride. Every chandelier sparkled as if trying to outshine the people beneath it. I arrived early with Clara, who looked breathtaking in a silver gown. Darren had insisted she wear something from an exclusive boutique, and she obliged, more for peace than for show. He met us in the lobby, already glowing with self-importance, his new suit catching the light like polished steel. Do I look like success or what? He said, smoothing his lapel. Clara smiled softly. You look very handsome, dear. He adjusted his cufflinks, glancing around the ballroom as if the whole night had been arranged in his honor. Tonight's the beginning of something huge. I can feel it. I studied the suit as he spoke, the perfect cut, the clean lines, the unmistakable echo of the pattern I knew by heart. He had no idea whose story he was wearing. The hall filled quickly: businessmen, designers, philanthropists. The kind of crowd that measured worth in brand names and whispered connections. Waiters glided between tables carrying glasses of champagne. A jazz trio played softly in the corner. Every detail screamed wealth and exclusivity. Darren mingled easily, introducing himself to strangers as if they already knew his name. "Darren Cole," he said proudly. "Cole Realty Group. We're expanding into luxury markets this year. Working with Mr. Langley himself has been an honor." I watched from a distance, sipping my drink, catching snippets of his conversations. He spoke loudly, confidently, quoting Victor as though the man's wisdom belonged to him. Clara stood beside him, smiling politely, but I could see she was uncomfortable. She wasn't made for this kind of vanity. She kept glancing toward me as if grounding herself in my quiet presence. When Victor entered the ballroom, a ripple of attention followed him. Cameras flashed. Guests straightened their posture. He carried himself with quiet authority, his presence commanding without effort. Even among all that glitter, he shone differently, not brighter, but steadier. Darren's face lit up. "There he is," he whispered to Clara. "My mentor." Victor moved through the crowd gracefully, greeting people with the poise of a man who had nothing to prove. When he reached our table, Darren jumped to shake his hand. "Mr. Langley, wonderful to see you. You've outdone yourself tonight." Victor smiled faintly. "Thank you, Mr. Cole. You wear my work well." "Of course," Darren said proudly. "It's more than a suit. It's a symbol." Victor's eyes flicked briefly to me, then back to Darren. "Indeed, a symbol can say a great deal about a person if they know how to read it." Clara introduced me. "Mr. Langley, this is my mother, Eleanor." Victor inclined his head politely. "A pleasure." Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. In that quiet moment, I felt the weight of all those years, the kindness of a young tailor, the struggle of a young widow, and the full circle of a story now unfolding in a room full of strangers. "Mrs. Cole," Victor said evenly, "it's an honor to finally meet you." I smiled. "The honor's mine." Darren, oblivious to the history between us, interrupted. "Mr. Langley, I've been telling everyone about our collaboration. This is just the beginning, I think." Victor nodded slowly. "Perhaps. Sometimes beginnings are also revelations." Darren laughed, not understanding. "Exactly. I couldn't agree more." Victor moved on to greet other guests, leaving Darren beaming like a man who thought he'd just sealed his future. Clara and I exchanged a quiet glance. She sensed something shifting but didn't know what. The night unfolded with speeches, laughter, and too much wine. Darren worked the room like a politician, shaking hands, making promises, never realizing that Victor's speech, the one everyone was waiting for, would turn the spotlight in a direction he couldn't control. As the music softened and the lights dimmed, an announcer's voice carried through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the incomparable Victor Langley." Applause filled the air. Darren leaned back in his chair, smiling proudly, clearly expecting to be mentioned as one of the designer's rising partners. Victor stood beneath the lights, calm and collected. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began. "This event is not only about fashion or commerce. It's about legacy, about the stories woven into the threads we wear." The room quieted. "When I began this journey," he continued, "I worked in a small shop in a forgotten corner of this city. I had nothing but a needle, a few yards of fabric, and the belief that kindness could be sewn into every stitch." My heart thudded. I could feel where he was going, but Darren clearly couldn't. He leaned toward Clara and whispered, "He's setting up the big announcement." Victor's eyes swept the crowd. "Tonight's featured suit, the design at the center of this gala, is a recreation of one of my earliest works. A suit I made for someone who reminded me that dignity is never about wealth, but about courage." A murmur moved through the audience. Darren straightened in his chair, his grin widening. Victor paused, letting silence settle like thread through fabric. "That woman is here tonight. She was my very first client, a young widow who couldn't pay me in full but offered me trust and kindness instead. That act of faith built the foundation for everything I've created since." The audience turned, curious. Victor gestured toward me. "Her name is Eleanor Cole." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Every face turned toward me, and the applause that followed sounded distant, muffled under the pounding in my chest. Clara gasped softly, covering her mouth. Darren froze beside her, his proud smile collapsing into confusion. Victor continued, his tone unwavering. Mrs. Cole's integrity inspired the pattern you've all seen tonight. Every piece in this collection, including the one worn by her son-in-law, is built upon the design she once wore. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Darren's eyes darted to me, his expression a mix of disbelief and dawning shame. The realization washed over him slowly that the very suit he'd mocked, the one he'd called a museum piece, had given birth to the masterpiece he was wearing now. He looked down at the jacket, then back at Victor, who met his gaze with quiet finality. Legacy, Victor said softly. Cannot be bought. It must be earned. The room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. And Darren, once so certain of his place in the spotlight, sat frozen, draped in the living proof of his own arrogance. I didn't move. I simply watched him, my heart calm. The lesson had begun, and there was no unthreading it now. For a moment, the ballroom seemed to freeze. The clinking of glasses stopped, the murmurs quieted, and all that remained was the echo of Victor's words lingering in the air. I sat perfectly still, feeling the heat rise in my face, not from embarrassment but from the weight of the moment. After so many years, my story, our story, had surfaced in front of a room full of strangers who now looked at me with admiration. Across the table, Darren's composure crumbled. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. His face, once confident and smug, was pale under the golden light. He looked at Clara, then at me, then back to Victor, searching for some misunderstanding that wasn't there. Victor stood tall beneath the spotlight, his voice calm and steady. I owe my career to Mrs. Cole, he continued. The kindness she showed me when I was struggling reminded me that real class begins in the heart, not in the wallet. Every stitch I've made since that day carries a little piece of her faith. Applause filled the room again, this time louder and warmer. People turned to look at me, nodding, smiling. Some even stood. I could feel tears pressing at the back of my eyes. I hadn't expected this, not recognition, not praise, only to see a lesson unfold quietly. But Victor had given me more than a moment. He had given my story dignity. Clara reached for my hand, squeezing it tightly. Mom, she whispered, her voice trembling. I had no idea. I smiled at her softly. You weren't supposed to. Darren remained silent, staring down at his plate. The applause eventually faded, but the silence that followed was louder. Everyone in the room now knew that the suit he wore, the one he'd bragged about endlessly, was patterned after mine. The same old thing he once laughed at was now the centerpiece of a luxury collection. Victor stepped closer to the edge of the stage. True craftsmanship, true legacy, he said, isn't about trends or titles. It's about gratitude. It's about remembering who helped you take the first step when you had nothing. He looked directly at Darren. And it's about understanding that the value of something or someone cannot be measured by how new or polished it appears. The words hit harder than any public humiliation could have. They were calm, honest, and final. Darren swallowed hard, his hands fidgeting in his lap. For once, he had nothing clever to say. When Victor stepped down from the stage, several people came to speak with me, journalists, guests, even a few designers. They asked about my life, my friendship with Victor, how it felt to see the past come full circle. I answered as modestly as I could, all the while aware of Darren sitting in silence beside me, shrinking in his expensive chair. After a while, Victor joined us at the table. Mrs. Cole, he said warmly, I hope I didn't embarrass you. I smiled through tears. You gave me back something I didn't know I'd lost, Victor cried. He nodded, his eyes soft. You gave me that first. Darren cleared his throat awkwardly. So, this whole collection was based on her? Victor turned to him, his tone polite but firm. Yes, every piece, including the one you're wearing. Darren blinked, his mouth tight. I didn't realize. No, Victor said evenly. You didn't, but now you do. Darren tried to compose himself. It's an incredible design. I mean, obviously, you're a genius. Victor didn't smile. It wasn't genius, Mr. Cole. It was gratitude. The words hung between them like smoke. Clara shifted uncomfortably, glancing between the two men. Then she turned to Darren and said softly, You always said you admired authenticity. Well, this is it. He looked at her helplessly, then at me, and for a fleeting second, I saw something crack behind his eyes, shame, maybe even understanding. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but Victor was already moving on to greet another guest. The rest of the evening unfolded in a blur. People continued to approach Victor and me, offering kind words, toasting to the power of legacy. Darren remained quiet, drinking slowly, his earlier bravado replaced with uneasy reflection. Clara tried to keep conversation light, but even she could feel the shift. Something fundamental had changed in the space between us. As the event came to a close, Victor returned to say goodbye. He leaned down and kissed my hand gently. "You did beautifully," he said. "You did all the work," I replied. He smiled. "No, Eleanor, you gave me the story. I only tailored it." He turned to Darren, extending his hand. "Thank you for wearing my design tonight. You wore it well though, perhaps, not quite as well as its first owner." Darren managed a weak smile and shook his hand. "I appreciate the opportunity," he muttered. Victor gave him a small nod. "Opportunities are everywhere, Mr. Cole. It's character that determines what we do with them." When he walked away, the silence at our table returned. Darren sat rigid, staring at the glass in front of him. Finally, he said, "I guess I've been an idiot." Clara sighed softly. "You think?" He looked at me, his eyes heavy with regret. "I mocked something priceless, didn't I?" I met his gaze and nodded gently. "You did. But what matters now is what you do with that knowledge." He didn't answer. He just nodded, the pride slowly draining from him, replaced by something quieter, humility, maybe even remorse. When the lights dimmed and people began leaving, I stood and took one last look around. The chandeliers shimmered, the music faded, and the room that had once felt like a temple to wealth now seemed smaller, more human. I turned to Clara and smiled. "Let's go home, sweetheart." She slipped her arm through mine as Darren followed a few steps behind, silent and subdued. Outside, the cool night air wrapped around us. Darren opened the car door for me without a word the first time he'd ever done that. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "Eleanor, I owe you an apology, for a lot more than the suit." I looked at him calmly. "I know, Darren, but tonight isn't about apologies. It's about understanding." He nodded slowly. "Then I understand." As the car pulled away from the glittering lights of the gala, I turned to watch the building shrink into the distance. I thought about Victor, about Henry, about all the years that had led to this one night of truth. Sometimes life doesn't shout its lessons, it whispers them, soft as thread passing through cloth. And tonight, that whisper had finally been heard. The next morning, sunlight crept gently through my curtains, painting faint golden lines across the floor. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, the newspaper folded beside me. My name was printed there in small, neat letters, Eleanor Cole, the woman who inspired Victor Langley's timeless design. It felt surreal. I had never sought recognition, yet somehow my quiet story had become part of something far larger than I ever imagined. But what stayed with me wasn't the article or the applause from the night before. It was the look on Darren's face that moment, when he realized what he'd been wearing, what he'd laughed at, and who he'd underestimated. His arrogance had melted into disbelief, then shame, and finally silence. I hadn't seen him or Clara since the gala ended. They'd dropped me home after midnight, Darren uncharacteristically quiet the entire ride. He hadn't even turned on the radio, just drove, eyes fixed on the road, hands gripping the wheel as if it were the only thing holding him together. Now, as I stared into my tea, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Clara. "Can we come over? Darren wants to talk." I typed back, "Of course. I'll make breakfast." When they arrived an hour later, Clara looked as radiant as ever, but there was tension in her shoulders. Darren followed behind her, a different man from the one who had strutted through the gala doors the night before. His hair was uncombed, his shirt untucked, and his usual confidence had been replaced by hesitation. "Morning, Mom," Clara said softly, setting down a basket of pastries. I smiled. "Morning, sweetheart." Darren nodded awkwardly. "Eleanor, coffee?" I asked. He nodded again, his voice low. "Please." We sat at the table in silence for a moment, the air heavy with everything unsaid. Finally, Darren cleared his throat. "I wanted to thank you," he began, his voice unsteady. "And to apologize. I made a fool of myself last night, not just there, but long before that." I sipped my tea, saying nothing, letting him continue. He looked down at his hands. "All this time, I've judged people by what they had, by what they wore. I thought success was something you could buy. I thought image was everything. But that suit," he trailed off, his voice catching. That suit was a reminder that I've been blind. I mocked something I didn't understand. I watched him carefully. There was no arrogance in his tone now, only sincerity and regret. Darren, I said gently. You weren't blind. You were distracted. You've been chasing a reflection instead of the truth. He looked up, eyes filled with guilt. And that truth was stitched into the suit, wasn't it? Every detail, every line, it all meant something, didn't it? I nodded slowly. Yes, every stitch had a purpose. Victor made that suit with the same care he gave mine all those years ago. The craftsmanship isn't what makes it valuable, it's the story behind it. It's the gratitude in every thread. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling. I never even asked about the design. I just wanted to look powerful. And you did, I said softly. But power without humility is fragile. It doesn't last. Clara reached for his hand. Darren's been quiet all morning, she said. He couldn't stop talking about Victor and you. He said he felt small. Darren shook his head. Not small, humbled. For the first time, I saw something genuine in his expression. The pride was gone, replaced by reflection. Last night, he said, when Victor said legacy can't be bought, I realized that's what I've been trying to do. I've been buying things to fill the gaps where meaning should be. And then I looked at that suit and I realized I've been wearing someone else's story without earning it. The room fell silent again. Outside, birds chirped, and sunlight warmed the curtains. I smiled faintly. The truth is, Darren, life has a way of tailoring lessons for us. Sometimes we don't like how they fit, but they're always made to measure. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. You sound like Victor. I laughed. He probably sounds like me. Clara squeezed my hand. Mom, I can't tell you how proud I am. Seeing you on that stage, hearing your name, it was the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed. Her words touched me deeply. Thank you, darling. But the real beauty wasn't in the recognition. It was in the realization that kindness never goes unnoticed, no matter how many years pass. Darren nodded, his eyes glistening. Victor told me something after you left, he said quietly. He said, some suits are stitched with patience, not thread. You just wore one. I smiled. That sounded exactly like Victor. He stood then, adjusting his sleeve subconsciously. I'd like to make it up to you somehow, Eleanor. I don't know how, but I want to. I rose too, walking to the small coat rack by the hallway. From it, I took down the old brown suit, carefully wrapped in a garment bag. I held it out to him. You can start by understanding this, I said. Look at it, not for what it's worth, but for what it represents. He took the bag hesitantly, unzipped it, and ran his hand over the fabric. It's perfect, he said softly. Still, it's more than fabric, I said. It's survival. It's the reminder that grace can exist even when life feels cruel. He nodded slowly, reverently. I see that now. Clara stood beside him, her eyes wet. It's beautiful, Mom. It's old, I said with a smile. But it's honest. When they left a while later, for what it's worth, he said, I don't think I'll ever look at a suit or a person the same way again. After they drove away, I placed the old suit back on its hanger, smoothing its shoulders. My fingers traced the seams that had once carried me through years of hardship. Now, those same stitches had carried a lesson straight into the heart of a man who needed it most. As the house grew quiet again, I whispered softly to the fabric. Well done, old friend. You've spoken louder than I ever could. A week after the gala, I received a letter. It arrived in a thick ivory envelope, the kind that feels deliberate before you even open it. The front was embossed with elegant gold lettering, Langley Atelier. My hands trembled slightly as I slid it open, the scent of fine paper and cedar rising faintly, the same scent that had lingered in Victor's old shop all those years ago. Inside was a handwritten note in Victor's familiar cursive. Eleanor, there are debts that money can never repay. Yours was faith, and that is priceless. I've sent something for you. Consider it a gift, though it's more of a thank you. The world finally knows your name, but I never forgot it. With gratitude and respect, Victor. Beneath the note was a smaller card with a delivery address and a time. Friday, noon. I smiled, shaking my head. Even after all these years, Victor still preferred surprises. When Friday arrived, I dressed simply and waited by the front window. Right at noon, a black car pulled up. 2 assistants stepped out, carrying a long box wrapped in cream paper and tied with a deep burgundy ribbon. They greeted me warmly, handed me the box, and left as quietly as they came. I brought it to the dining table and unwrapped it carefully. Inside lay a suit, my suit, but not the brown wool one I'd worn for decades. This one was new. The fabric shimmered faintly under the light, soft yet strong, tailored in Victor's unmistakable precision. It was a deep shade of heather gray, with golden stitching along the inner lining. Inside, near the pocket, were two small embroidered letters. E.L. Tears filled my eyes as I ran my fingers over the initials. A note lay folded inside the jacket pocket, made with the same care as the first. For the woman who taught me that grace is the truest luxury. I pressed the note to my chest and let the tears fall freely. The weight of 30 years of struggle, loss, rebuilding, and quiet endurance seemed to lift in that moment. The suit wasn't just a gift. It was recognition, a tangible piece of gratitude sewn into something I could wear with pride. That evening, Clara and Darren came by for dinner. I hadn't told them about the delivery. I wanted to see their faces when they saw it for themselves. When they walked in, Clara's eyes immediately caught the open box on the table. "Mom, what's that?" "Something from an old friend," I said softly. She stepped closer, gasping as she touched the fabric. "This is stunning. Is it from Mr. Langley?" I nodded, smiling. "He said it's a thank you." Darren stood quietly beside her, his expression unreadable. Then he said, almost in a whisper, "He made another one for you." "Yes," I said. "He did." He reached out carefully, as if afraid to disturb it. "It's perfect," he said. "Like his suits always are. But this one, it feels different." "It is," I said. "Because it was made from memory, not measurement." Clara smiled through tears. "You deserve this, Mom." I looked at her, my heart full. I didn't do anything special. I just treated someone kindly when I had little to give. "And look what that kindness became," Darren said softly. "An empire." His tone was sincere, humbled. The arrogance that once sharpened every word was gone. He looked at me with something like reverence, maybe even gratitude. We ate together that night, laughter slowly replacing the heaviness that had lingered between us. For the first time in a long while, the air felt light. Clara told stories about work, and Darren listened instead of interrupting. When he spoke, it was softer, thoughtful. Something in him had truly shifted since that night at the gala. After dinner, Darren stood and walked toward the suit box again. "About legacy, about character," I smiled. "It's a lesson that stays with you. Like a good suit, it wears in, not out." He nodded, almost smiling. "I used to think success was about being seen. Now I know it's about being remembered for the right reasons." I could see Clara's eyes glisten as she looked at him. Whatever wounds had existed between them seemed to heal a little more with every honest word. Before they left that evening, Darren hesitated at the door. "Do you think I could ever meet Mr. Langley again? To thank him properly?" "I think he'd like that," I said. "But thank him through your actions. That's how he'll know you learned." He nodded firmly. "I will." After they were gone, I sat alone with the new suit. I lifted it from the box and held it up against me, the fabric catching the dim light of the room. It wasn't just beautiful, it was symbolic. A full circle. The beginning and end of a story that had started in kindness and come home through gratitude. As I hung it beside the old brown suit, I couldn't help but notice how they seemed to complement each other, one the past, one the present. Both carried the same thread of strength through time. Later that night, I called Victor. He answered on the second ring, his familiar calm voice filling my ear. "So," he said, "did the fit please you?" I smiled. "It's perfect, as always. But it's more than that. It's the most meaningful thing I've ever received." He chuckled. "You once told me the same thing about a suit made from scraps and hope. And I meant it then too," I said. "You've given me two gifts in my life, one when I had nothing, and one when I have everything I need." He was quiet for a moment. "Eleanor, the gift wasn't the suit. It was your faith. I just returned it in fabric form." I blinked back tears. "You've always known how to say the right thing." "I'm a tailor," he said warmly. "Words and stitches aren't so different. Both hold people together." We said goodbye, and I hung up the phone, feeling the soft echo of his words long after the call ended. Before bed, I stood once more in front of the closet. Two suits decades apart, yet bound by one story. I smiled and whispered, "Thank you, Victor," before turning off the light. The next morning, I woke with a quiet peace in my chest. The past no longer felt heavy, it felt whole. And the gift I'd received wasn't just cloth and thread, it was the reminder that kindness, once given freely, always finds its way back. It was late one evening, about 2 weeks after Victor's gift arrived, when I heard a knock at my door. The sun had just slipped below the horizon, and the house was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. When I opened the door, Darren stood there, his expression uncertain, his hands shoved awkwardly into his coat pockets. "Eleanor," he said softly, "I hope I'm not intruding." I shook my head. "Not at all. Come in." He stepped inside, glancing around as if unsure what to do with himself. He wasn't dressed like the man I'd come to know, no sharp suit, no designer watch. Just a simple gray sweater and jeans. His hair was a little unkempt, his face tired. But for the first time since I'd known him, he looked real. "Clara's working late," he said quietly. "I wanted to talk to you, alone." I gestured to the kitchen. "Then sit down. I'll make tea." He nodded and followed, sitting at the same table where we'd had countless uncomfortable dinners before. But this time, he didn't fill the silence with self-importance. He just waited. When I set his cup in front of him, he said, "Thank you," almost in a whisper. I sat down opposite him, folding my hands. "What's on your mind?" He stared into his tea for a long time before speaking. "I've spent the last few weeks thinking about everything that happened. The gala, Victor, you, that suit. I can't get it out of my head. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was clarity." He looked up, his eyes heavy with remorse. "I've treated you unfairly since the day I met you. I thought you were beneath me. I thought your simplicity was something to be pitied. But now I see it was the opposite. You're everything I should have respected from the start." His voice cracked slightly, and he took a shaky breath. "I'm ashamed, Eleanor. Deeply ashamed." For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just watched. Him. This man who had once been all ego and bravado, now stripped down to humility. It wasn't easy for him, I could see that. And that made it all the more meaningful. "Darren," I said gently, "we all learn our lessons in our own time. Some take longer than others. What matters is that you learned yours." He nodded slowly. "Victor taught me something that night, but so did you. He told me afterward that the greatest mistake people make is confusing price with value. I think I've done that my entire life with people, with work, even with Clara." I sipped my tea and waited, letting him untangle his own thoughts. "I've spent years trying to prove something," he continued. "To everyone, my colleagues, my investors, even my wife, but mostly to myself. I thought being powerful meant never looking weak. That confidence meant never admitting fault. But I've realized that confidence without compassion is just vanity." His words hung in the air for a moment. He looked down again. "You probably think it's too late for me to change." I smiled softly. "It's never too late for anyone who's willing to look inward." He gave a small laugh, but there was no humor in it, just self-awareness. "I keep thinking about that night, how proud I was walking into that gala, and then hearing my name, realizing what I was wearing. It was like the world stopped. And for the first time, I saw myself the way others did, shallow, arrogant, small." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "You saw the truth, Darren. And that's something most people spend their whole lives avoiding." He blinked back tears. "I hurt you with my words. I mocked something that represented everything good about you, resilience, humility, grace. I'll never forgive myself for that." "You don't have to," I said softly. "I already have." He looked up sharply. "You have?" I nodded. "Anger is heavy, Darren. I've carried enough weight in my life. I choose not to carry more. You've learned your lesson, that's enough for me." He leaned back, exhaling deeply, as if a burden had lifted from his chest. "You're remarkable," he said quietly. "I don't know how you do it, forgive so easily." "It's not easy," I admitted. "But it's freeing. Forgiveness isn't for the person who hurt you. It's for the one who refuses to let that hurt define them." He nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. For a long time, we sat in silence, sipping our tea. The only sound the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Then, he said, "I went back to see Victor. That surprised me." "You did?" "Yes. I wanted to thank him properly. He told me something I'll never forget. He said, 'A good tailor doesn't just repair seams, he mends people.' I think that's what he did for me. He stitched humility back into me where arrogance used to live." A genuine smile spread across my face. That sounds like Victor. He also said something else, Darren continued. He told me you're the reason he still believes in people, that your kindness saved him when he was struggling. He said you didn't just give him business, you gave him dignity. I felt tears sting my eyes again. He gave it back to me 1,000-fold. Darren looked down, his voice barely a whisper. I don't deserve the kindness you've both shown me, but I want to earn it. I want to be the kind of man Clara deserves, and the kind of son-in-law you can be proud of. I smiled gently. Then start with honesty, Darren. Build everything on that. The rest will follow. He nodded, wiping at his eyes. I will, I promise. When he left that night, he hugged me before he went, not the quick, polite kind of hug he used to give, but a real one, the kind that carried meaning. I stood in the doorway after he drove away, the cool air brushing against my face. Inside, I looked at the 2 suits hanging side by side in my closet. The old brown one, simple and strong. The new gray one, elegant and refined. Together, they told the story of everything that had changed, and everything that hadn't. For the first time, I believed Darren's apology wasn't just words. It was the beginning of something better. And maybe, just maybe, forgiveness had tailored us both into something new. A month after that quiet evening with Darren, Clara called to invite me to dinner. Her voice sounded light, hopeful, the kind of tone I hadn't heard from her in a long time. Mom, she said, you'll want to come to this one. Darren's been working on something special. I smiled, amused. Something special? You'll see, she said with a hint of mystery. Just come around 7, and wear Victor's new suit. I agreed, though I couldn't imagine what Darren could possibly have planned. Still, I pressed the gray suit carefully, ran a brush along the shoulders, and stood in front of the mirror for a long moment before leaving. It fit like a second skin, graceful, strong, ageless. The woman staring back at me wasn't the widow who had once struggled to feed her daughter. She was someone whole. When I arrived, the house was warm and filled with soft music. Clara met me at the door with a hug, her eyes sparkling. You look beautiful, Mom. Thank you, sweetheart, I said. What's all this about? Before she could answer, Darren appeared from the kitchen, holding a tray of wine glasses. He was wearing his own Langley suit, the same one from the gala, but there was something different about it now. His posture was humbler, his smile genuine. Eleanor, he said warmly, you look radiant. Please, sit down. We have a little surprise for you. I raised an eyebrow but followed him to the dining room. On the wall behind the table hung a framed photo, a black and white picture of my old brown suit on a mannequin, perfectly pressed and displayed. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "The Eleanor Collection, a tribute to integrity and kindness." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My hand flew to my mouth. What is this? Clara smiled. It's Darren's idea. He nodded, his voice steady but emotional. After everything that happened, I wanted to do something meaningful. So I met with Victor again. We talked about creating something lasting, something that could give back. He's launching a new initiative to support young tailors and designers who can't afford training or materials. And we're funding it through my company. I blinked in disbelief. You're serious? He nodded. It's called the Eleanor Foundation. Victor thought of the name. It'll provide scholarships and mentorships for people who have the skill but not the resources, just like he once didn't. My chest tightened. I had to sit down. Darren, I don't know what to say. He smiled faintly. Say you'll let me do this. It's the least I can do for everything you and Victor have taught me. Clara took my hand. It's already started, Mom. The first workshop opens next month. Victor's going to be a guest mentor. Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. You've both done something I never imagined possible. Darren looked down for a moment, his voice thick with emotion. You gave me perspective, Eleanor. You and Victor both. I used to think success was measured in applause. Now I know it's measured in gratitude. He gestured toward the framed suit. I wanted to honor what that old brown suit represented: humility, endurance, grace. I used to laugh at it because I didn't understand it. But now I know it's the finest thing I've ever seen. I couldn't stop smiling through the tears. You've changed, Darren. He nodded. I had to. That night at the gala, broke something in me and rebuilt something better in its place. Dinner was beautiful. Simple food, soft laughter, honest conversation. There were no pretenses, no forced politeness, just family. For the first time since Clara married, I felt peace between us, a quiet understanding that went deeper than words. After we ate, Darren poured me another glass of wine and handed me a small box wrapped in silver paper. "One last thing," he said. Inside was a gold brooch shaped like a needle and thread. I laughed softly through my tears. "You didn't." "I did," he said, smiling. "Victor helped design it. The inscription on the back says, 'Strength is stitched in silence.'" I fastened it to my lapel, feeling the weight of it light yet full of meaning. "It's perfect," I whispered. Later, when the dishes were cleared and the night had settled into comfortable quiet, Clara played a soft tune on the piano while Darren and I talked. He told me how Victor had become a friend, not just a mentor. They met often now, sharing ideas about merging craftsmanship and community. "He told me he never forgot your first visit," Darren said. "He said it reminded him why he started. He told me he still owes everything to a woman in a brown wool suit who believed in him." I smiled. "He's too kind." "He's right," Darren said gently. "You changed his life. And now, you've changed mine." When it was time to leave, Darren walked me to the door. The night air was cool, and the stars shimmered faintly above the quiet street. He hesitated, then said, "Eleanor, I know I've said this before, but thank you for forgiving me, for showing me what real worth looks like." I touched his arm. "You showed it to yourself, Darren. You just needed the right mirror." He smiled, nodding slowly. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that forgiveness." As I walked down the path, I looked back at them through the doorway, Clara leaning against the piano, Darren beside her, his arm gently around her shoulders. For the first time, they looked like equals. Not a man trying to outshine his wife, but a husband finally standing beside her. When I got home, I hung my gray suit beside the old brown one, both framed by the soft lamplight. They stood there together, two eras, two chapters of the same story, the past and the present, stitched together by kindness, patience, and time. I ran my hand along the sleeve of the old one, then the new. "We've come full circle," I whispered. And I realized that the truest revenge I'd ever taken wasn't humiliation or triumph, it was transformation. Darren hadn't just learned a lesson, he'd become living proof of it. As I turned off the light, the suits glowed faintly in the soft golden haze, side by side, a quiet reminder that dignity never fades, and that kindness, once sown, always finds its way back home.